Today we are talking about diffusion, osmosis, and active transport. So these are the three ways at IGCSE that we learn about how things move across the cell membrane. The world is quite a bit more complex than this, quite a bit more fun and involved, but these are the three core things that you need to know for IG level. So our subtitle here is Transport Across the Cell Membrane. And we're actually going to start with all three of them before we get into the details of each one. Because what is really important as you learn these three is that you pick up what is special and unique about each one. So let's split our screen between diffusion osmosis and active transport. You're going to come across all of these three throughout your course, so it's really important that you've got a good grasp of them as you get going. So let us start with diffusion. Whenever we talk about diffusion, we are talking about moving from high concentration to low concentration. So movement from high to low. It is a passive process. There is no energy involved. It is all about the movement of particles. And we are referring to a concentration gradient. So now you've got a good idea of what's going to go into the next few columns in terms of what's different. So, osmosis, it's also the same. It is also from high to low. It is also passive. But now here's a big difference. Diffusion is the movement of particles. Osmosis is the movement of water only. So we only use the term osmosis when we are talking about movement of water. Okay, so the other thing is diffusion can happen anywhere. Diffusion can happen in a room. It doesn't have to happen across a cell membrane. Okay? Osmosis has to be across a cell membrane. Okay? So osmosis is across a membrane, and we don't talk about concentration because we don't talk about concentration of water. We talk about the water potential gradient. So we'll get into the details of each of these as we look at each of these in turn. But it's really important that you're starting to pick up diffusion and osmosis. They've got a lot of similarities. They are from high to low. They are both passive processes. Diffusion, however, is just general movement of particles, whereas osmosis is movement of water only. Okay? Osmosis has to involve a membrane. It has to involve a partially permeable membrane, in this case, the cell membrane. Okay? When we talk about diffusion, we talk about a concentration gradient. So we would say high concentration to low concentration. When we talk about osmosis, we talk about a water potential gradient. So we would say high water potential to low water potential. So then we come to active transport. He is the odd one out completely. Active transport goes from low to high. No longer passive. The name says it all. This is an active process. We need energy in order for active transport to happen. Where do we get that energy? aerobic respiration in the mitochondria. Okay, that produces ATP, and that is used then for the active transport. Again, we are back to movement of particles. We're not moving water anymore. We're moving other more interesting things. Okay, again, we are talking about a concentration gradient. It's just that in this case, we are going from a low concentration to a high concentration. We're going against the concentration gradient. And the big deal here, we are using energy from respiration. So we've got diffusion, we've got osmosis, we've got active transport. Each of them has things in common with another one, but they also have their own special, unique differences. So diffusion is movement of particles, concentration gradient. That's our like basic, high to low. Osmosis, movement of water, involvement of that membrane, and water potential terminology. Active transport, low to high, active, energy from respiration. So get very comfortable with your idea of diffusion, and then you can add in like, what's different when I come to osmosis? What's different when I come to active transport? Okay, so a few examples. Diffusion would be movement of oxygen, carbon dioxide. Both of these are able to just simply diffuse across a membrane. When it comes to osmosis, there is only one example. That would have to be water. When it comes to active transport, root hair cells, mineral ions. We also talk about movement of glucose as an active transport. Okay, when we come to humans instead of plants. Okay, so there's different things being transported across membranes, and they each have a special way of doing it, and we're just sticking to diffusion, osmosis, and active transport. So now we're going to look at each of these in a little bit more detail so that we can see an overview, more of what's coming. So kicking off with diffusion, our starting point. It does help if you can spell your technical terms correctly, not get distracted, even if it's Monday morning. Diffusion is spelled with an N at the end. Okay, so diffusion. There is a big definition, and it is worth being familiar with. So let's play here and see what happens. We can. The net movement of particles from a region of their higher concentration to a region of their lower concentration down a concentration gradient as a result of their random movement. Okay, so, whoa, hold on. Now I'm just making hundreds of text boxes. So I don't know how to move this. Maybe we can press this one. Ah, there we go. And I can resize it. You see, you learn a new thing every day. So now that you got a nice, neat version of this typed, let us look at what are we pulling out of here. Okay, so net movement of particles. Okay, remember we said we are talking about concentration gradients. So from higher concentration to lower concentration. It is comparative. Okay, so the concentration is higher here and lower here. So we'll move down. Okay, and it is down a concentration gradient as a result of random movement. It is passive. There is no energy involved. So this here Or let's put it a little bit bigger. It's all about kinetic energy. Okay, because kinetic energy is that random movement, and things just juggle and shuffle and do their little thing and move and vibrate, and all of a sudden we have diffusion. It just happens. It's completely random, and it's a completely result of kinetic energy. What is important when we think about diffusion is what can affect diffusion. Okay, what makes diffusion happen faster? What makes it happen slower? And there are 4 things that we need to consider. When we're considering speed of diffusion, we need to consider surface area, temperature, concentration gradient, and distance. Okay, so when we are talking about surface area, we're talking the space over which things can diffuse. So if you have a small space, then you can get a little bit of diffusion. If you have a bigger space, then of course you can have more diffusion. Okay, so increasing surface area increases the rate of diffusion. When it comes to temperature, the effect, okay, so let's say increase surface area, therefore increase diffusion. When it comes to temperature, it's all about that kinetic energy. And remember that particles have a higher kinetic energy when they have a higher temperature. So if you have more kinetic energy, you've got more movement going on, then therefore you're going to have more diffusion. So if we increase temperature, we're going to increase diffusion. Concentration gradient. Think of it like a slope. If we have higher to lower like this, or if we have higher to lower like this, which one would a ball roll down faster? The steeper one. Okay, so if we have a steeper concentration gradient, then we're going to have more diffusion. So steeper, so more concentration gradient gives us increased diffusion. And the last thing is distance. Okay, so let's say we have to get across this space, or we have to get across this space. See, distance is the one that's different. Here, if we have a shorter distance, diffusion will be faster. So shorter distance, we have faster diffusion. Okay, so higher surface area, higher temperature, larger surface area, higher temperature, steeper concentration gradient, and shorter distance are all things that are going to increase the rate of diffusion. Because it's all just a random effect, movement of particles. So let's then take this and do a similar sort of thing for osmosis. Okay, we'll experiment with this typing job again. So osmosis, the net movement of water molecules from a region of higher water potential to a region of lower water potential through a partially permeable membrane. So this is why we can do experiments with osmosis without using cells. We can use just membranes to look at osmosis, because a membrane is a membrane is a membrane, partially permeable, of course. Okay, it's just that our cell membrane is an example of a partially permeable membrane. So, osmosis, net movement of water molecules from a region of higher water potential to a region of lower water potential down a water potential gradient through a partially permeable membrane. Okay, this is also a passive process. There is no energy involved here. Okay, but what is quite funky is if we look now at osmosis in regards to animal cells and plant cells. Okay, partially permeable membrane, e.g. the cell membrane. So let us split between what happens in animal cells and plant cells. So, in animal cells, let's say we have a cell. Okay? Now, net movement of water molecules. So, let's say that the water potential is lower outside the cell. What's going to happen? Remember, we're moving from high water potential to low water potential. So if it's lower outside, all the water is going to move out. And our cell will shrivel and shrink because we lose all the water from inside it. If we have the situation where we have the water potential is higher outside, now the opposite is going to happen. Instead of the water moving out of the cell, the water is going to move into the cell because remember we're going from higher to lower. Well, a cell membrane is not a very strong thing. So if all that water moves in and now the water keeps on moving in, now the cell is filling up with water and it's going to fill up and it's going to fill up, that cell's going to burst. So it would actually destroy the cell if you put it in a solution where the water potential is higher outside the cell. Plant cells have a little bit more fun. In a plant cell, we have a far more interesting story. Okay, so the plant cell, there it is, with, of course, a cell wall. Now that cell wall is critical when it comes to this sort of thing. Let's say now that our water potential is lower outside. So the same thing happens, the water leaves, but the cell wall, remember, is a solid structure. So nothing happens to the cell wall, stays exactly the same. But the contents of the cell, the cytoplasm and surrounded by the membrane, that is going to shrink. So we end up with a smaller, that's your cell membrane, it's no longer stuck to the outside of the cell. And we call this cell, it's so important, it actually has a special name, plasmolysed. So plasmolysis has occurred and the water has left. If we have the opposite, water potential is higher outside. So we get our cell wall. Nothing happens to the cell wall. It's a solid, strong structure. And the water goes in, and the water goes in, and the water goes in, and then it can't go in anymore because there's no space for that cell to keep expanding. So while an animal cell can potentially expand to the point of bursting, plant cell cannot. It can only expand to a point where it filled that cell wall completely. And that is when our cell is called turgid. So when we're looking at things like water movement in and out of pieces of potato, okay? That's a brilliant example of osmosis because the water is moving from an area of a high water potential to a low water potential, and depending on which solution you've got your potato in is going to affect whether the water moves in or out of those cells. And therefore, if you end up with plasmolized cell and the potato goes all floppy and horrible, or if you end up with turgid cells and that potato is really firm because all of those cells are full to the brim of water. Okay, so osmosis is movement of water molecules from a region of higher water potential to a region of lower water potential. We can't talk about concentration of water, that just doesn't make sense. Okay, so it's always water potential, and osmosis is always through a partially permeable membrane. Of course, that has then different impacts on animal cells and plant cells. And it's all because of that cell wall in the plant cells that provides that structural integrity to the cell. So we have one left, active transport. So when it comes to active transport, our full definition for active transport, the movement of particles across a cell membrane from a region of their lower concentration to a region of their higher concentration using energy from respiration. Really, really important things there. Active transport really is our odd one out when it comes to different types of transport across that cell membrane. So let's get some color going. Movement of particles, okay, we're back there. Cross the cell membrane from a region of lower to higher. So we are going against the concentration gradient. Remember when we talked about diffusion, we said we're going down the concentration gradient. When we talked about osmosis, we talked about going down the water potential gradient. Here we're going against it, okay? And we are using energy from respiration. This is an active process. Now the thing is, we also can't just, things aren't going to sort of randomly move, okay? If we think about the cell membrane, okay, things, water and other particles that can diffuse, they can just move across the membrane. Here we need something that's going to actually enable this movement. And what we have are specialized carrier proteins. In the membrane. And the job of these proteins is to actually move these particles across. So it's a protein that gets that energy and then changes shape in order to move the particle across. So if we just have a quick look about how that might work, when we're drawing a cell membrane, then we can draw a carrier protein and it'll look something like this. This is our sort of standard way of drawing a carrier protein. And then you'll often see circles and squiggles. Okay, so your membrane is made up of phospholipids, very special kind of fat. Okay, and they make up the membrane, and then you have this carrier protein. So what comes in is this thing to be transported. So he comes in. So this is step 1, step 2, and step 3. So in step 2, our protein is going to change shape. So let's say this is outside the membrane, okay? Then the mineral ion, for example, has come into our carrier protein, and he does this flip. So now it's facing the other side. So all of those phospholipids all stay there. You learn a lot more about these guys when you get to AS biology. But now you can just believe that they exist. Okay, all the circles and all the squiggles. But now our mineral ion is on the inside. And he can move into the cell. Okay? Similar to a thing if you're going from inside to outside. You could be losing things through active transport. The idea is that we have that energy, and that's what changes the shape of this carrier protein and releases the particle being transported on the other side of the membrane. So once he's done, once his particle's been released, then we go back to the beginning again. And there we go. So now we're ready then for the next particle. So the protein can go on and on and on, just moving a specific particle across that membrane, changing shape as a result of the energy that's provided from respiration. So it's quite a different process than the previous two. So if we go back, we've got diffusion, high to low, concentration. Okay? Down the concentration gradient, passive process. It's all about the movement of particles as a result of that random movement. Okay, kinetic energy. Osmosis, down a water potential gradient, from high water potential to low water potential. Also a passive process, movement of water, and therefore it is water only, and it has to be across a cell membrane. Okay? Across a partially permeable membrane, in this case, the cell membrane. When it comes to active transport, it's the flip side. It is from low concentration to high concentration. Also an active process, and it's all about the movement of particles. Because it's active, we need that energy of respiration, and it's energy from respiration because we are moving against the concentration gradient. So you've got diffusion, osmosis, and active transport, and all of those are key ways that we can transport things across a cell membrane.